Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Brentwood Chamber of Commerce, Brentwood Business Partnership and Brentwood Borough Council joint webinar with our guest today, Lyndsay Salmon. Lyndsay's an HR specialist and is going to talk to us about the various implications of the current furlough scheme. My name's Colin Barber and I'm the chairman of Brentwood Chamber of Commerce, and I also run a business called The Management Mechanic. I'm a trainer, coach and consultant specialising in the application of psychology in business. Our presenter today is Lyndsay Salmon, and who runs an HR consultancy, and we'll hear a little bit more from Lyndsay in a second. And of course, you, the audience, would like to thank you very much for joining us today. This is a slightly different format from what we've done in the past on our joint training sessions. Some of you may be aware that along with Brentwood Business Partnership and Brentwood Borough Council, we've been running various training courses over the past year or two, but obviously with the change in circumstances, we decided to go for webinars. This is actually the second in a series of webinars. Last week we had Chris Bushell from Smart Support talking about crisis management, and we do have further webinars planned. But just in case I do forget to mention it later on, if any of you either yourselves think you would be interested in presenting a webinar, or you know of someone else who you think has got a useful aspect on the current situation that would be a good presenter, then do let us know. Whilst the main focus of the webinars is on how we overcome the current crisis, it doesn't necessarily mean that all the webinars have to be specifically on that subject. So if you feel there's something else that people might be interested in learning about whilst they've perhaps got different circumstances, more time on their hands or more flexibility in their working hours, then again, do let us know. So I'd like to thank you all for joining us today, and hope you enjoy it and find it very useful. Lyndsay's format is that it's not a long PowerPoint presentation or anything like that. It's really primarily Lyndsay answering queries about the furlough scheme and more general HR related issues. We did ask for questions in advance, and actually we've received a lot of questions already, so that's really useful. But I'll just point out a couple of points to you on your screen if maybe you're not so familiar with webinars. First of all, there's a Q&A button. Depending on the layout of your screen, it's probably at the bottom of your screen. If you click on the Q&A and you want to ask us a question, then just click on the Q&A and feel free to send a question in to us. It may well be that someone's already asked that question, but that's not a problem. I'll obviously see which questions are the most popular. There's also a chat button. If you just want to send a message to me or to Lyndsay during the presentation, then just click on the chat button. There's also a poll button as well. We may run a poll during the presentation. Depends how things pan out. And if you find that there's a question which Lyndsay asks you maybe want to elaborate on, or you want to clarify a particular point of that question, again, feel free to use the Q&A section to come back to us and ask us for clarification on a particular point. In terms of the actual talking, it's just me and Lyndsay that will be talking today. So any communications from you to us, we'd ask you to use either the Q&A or the chat, please. So I just need to check with Lyndsay that she's there. Are you there, Lyndsay? Would you like to turn your video on?
Yes, hello, hi.
Good morning, Lyndsay, welcome. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you, Colin. And you?
Yes, thank you. Yes, very well, thank you. Yes, yes.
Excellent.
We're looking forward to hearing from you today, Lyndsay, because I mean, I hope you're ready. But we do have a real lot of questions for you about the HR furlough scheme.
Okay.
But before we go on to that, Lyndsay, just tell me a little bit about your business and what you actually do. Just give a little bit of background to you.
Okay, so I'm a HR consultant, and I help lots of different types of businesses with any sort of employment law or HR issues or problems that they have. So some of the businesses that I have worked for are like Costa Coffee. I've done grievance investigations for Channel 4, worked at the National Gallery, so some really big employers, but also some really like small employers, like with the landscape gardeners that I work for in Chelmsford. He's got 3 employees, one is his brother, one is his nephew. He wanted a handbook that specifically said that they couldn't keep taking smoking breaks. So, you know, sometimes it's very small businesses that have sort of issues with their employees. I worked for manufacturing, construction, and I've worked in for quite a long time. Lots of different businesses. So, yeah.
Great. Okay. So you've obviously got a wealth of experience in HR and law and everything.
Yeah.
But of course, when we were chatting the other day, the interesting thing you told me is that normally when a new law comes into being, is it 2 years? Did you tell me that you normally have to familiarise yourself with the law before it actually becomes legally binding? Is that right?
Yeah, so that's what we were talking about, like why are there so many questions about this furlough scheme? And the reason that there are so many questions and that sometimes employment barristers or that I don't know the answers is because usually if a new piece of legislation is introduced, then you have 2 years for that piece of legislation to be consulted on before it's implemented into UK legislation. But with the furlough scheme, we had about 2 weeks and it was introduced and the guidance keeps being revised. And we've now got directions, which are the actual legal wording around the scheme. But again, it hasn't covered all the various anomalies that would normally be picked up in that 2-year consultation period. So, yeah.
Right, okay. So whatever happens, really, we do have to accept there will be a few, as you say, anomalies, a few problems along the way, teething problems which normally would have been dealt with earlier on, and they're just going to be one of those things, yeah.
I think as well that the important point on that is to just keep an eye on the guidance, because the guidance keeps changing. We're hoping that it's now at more or less a static point, but there have been weekly updates. I was just moaning to you, wasn't I, about they're always on a Friday at 5 o'clock, but there's been lots of updates and sometimes it's changed the guidance quite significantly. So an example of that is that previously it said that you had to just agree with the employee that they'd go on furlough, but then the 15th of April guidance came out and that said that you needed written confirmation that the employee had agreed to not work during furlough, and that was different to what the guidance had been before. So now all employees were going back out to ask for that written agreement. So yeah, it keeps changing, so keep an eye on it.
And just out of interest, sort of in this day and age of emails, when you say written confirmation, would that literally have to be pen and paper?
No, it can be an email.
Can be an email, right? Okay, yeah, good. Well, maybe maybe just a good starting point would be to ask you a sort of obvious question: what exactly is furlough?
But what is furlough? So furlough is a government-based scheme that will compensate employers up to 80% or £2,500, whichever is the lower, of an employee's wages or salary costs, to enable employers to keep their staff on, so to retain their staff.
Okay, and is there any precedent for this? I mean, where did the 80% come from? Was it just a figure that was plucked out of the air? Do you know? Or
yeah, no, I don't know whether, it's very generous, particularly for a Conservative government. Quite surprised.
Yeah. And I know this wasn't. I'm just curious myself to know. Is it something that's going on in other countries as well? Do you know? Is there similar schemes in other countries or? I'm
not sure. I understand in the US they've sent every person in the US a payment of, I think it's like $1,500 or something, but everybody gets that regardless of whether they have been working or not working, and they can choose what they do with that money. But obviously they're not based on a socialist model. I imagine in Europe there might be perhaps other more generous schemes because they have perhaps more socialist government policy, but I don't know.
Okay. And what about the date parameters? I think the deadline, the end of the scheme was extended, wasn't it, this week to, is it the end of June or?
Yeah, end of June. So it's been extended till the end of June. I'm hoping that doesn't mean that we're going to be on lockdown till the end of June, but we might be. It was extended to that period because there was lots of concern in the sort of HR and employment law community that that we were running out of time, because if you have more than 100 employees, then you have to consult with them for 45 days. If at the end of that period you might make them redundant. So I think we extended it for that period.
Okay. And am I right in thinking it can be backdated to the 1st of March?
Yes, that's correct.
How would that work then? So you would have had to have already told the person they were going to be furloughed on the 1st of March to backdate it?
Yes, or you might have told, so some employers, so I think I was saying to you that I was really glad that they brought this scheme in, because when everybody first started to have sort of corona panic, I've got lots of employers that pay me a monthly retainer, and they were calling me to say, Lyndsay, we're going to have to make all of our staff redundant because we've got no work coming in, and what are we going to do if there's lockdown, etc., etc. And some of those employers did start to lay people off. So they would put them on layoff, which is quite a technical sort of system where you can put people on unpaid leave for 4 weeks before you have to consider redundancy. So some employers had already started to do that at the beginning of March. Maybe not right from the 1st of March, but from the middle of March when this started to escalate. So they may have already started to do that, or indeed even have made people redundant and said, I've got no work for you, you're redundant. So they had in effect not been working. So it can be backdated if the staff were not working before the scheme was officially launched.
Yeah, right, okay. And you mentioned earlier about your staff have to put it in writing they accept going on furlough. So what happens if they don't if they don't put the right off, they don't accept it, what happens then?
Oh gosh, so if you write to someone and they say, no, I don't want to go on furlough.
Yeah.
So I think that you would then, in the letter that you write to them, depending on your relationship with the staff, I'd hope that you speak to them beforehand, though I know that's not always possible. But the alternative to furlough is that you make them redundant. So you would begin a process of consulting with them to then make their role redundant if they will not accept going on to furlough.
Right.
I think the fact that it's paid at 80% for most employees will mean that they will agree. But of course, it's only 80% up to 2,500. So I do have some employers who have quite high paid staff who perhaps are in roles that are more professional services, and actually 80% doesn't even cover like 40% of that employee's normal salary. They are less keen to go on furlough. So,
yeah, that's true. Yeah. And am I correct in thinking that the extra 20%, the employer can choose whether or not they want to pay it? It's up to them whether they want to top up the 20%. Is that correct?
Yeah. So for some employers, it will be 20%, but for that professional services company, they'd have to top up 60%. They can choose to top up or not as much or as little as they want to. Okay.
And what happens in this current day and age? I know a lot of people are either they get paid as and when they work, or they're on 0 hours contract, and every month they get a different salaries. What 80% of what would it be? 80% of their expected salary, 80% of
so it depends when they started working. So if they've been working for you for more than a year, you can either look back at what they were paid in the same period last year. So what were they paid in April 2019, or you can take an average of their pay for the whole of 19 to 20, for the last 12 months, and you pay them whichever one is the higher. If they haven't been working for you for a year, then you obviously can't look back at the same period last year because they weren't working for you. You just take the average of what they have been working since working for you. So they've been working 10 months, then it's the average of the last.
Okay. And the big question
on that point, you actually don't have to furlough people who are on casual or 0 hours or variable hour contracts if you don't want to, because you could say going forward, I'm giving you 0 hours.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
I think that's a bit mean. Bear in mind that you can actually furlough them and claim that grant back from the government.
So it will make no sense really for an employer to do that if they know they can get the 80% from the government. And just to clarify, presumably once the 80% is paid, then the employee still pays their tax and national insurance, and then presumably the employer has to pay their employer's national insurance on the 80%, do they?
There is the grant will cover that as well. So the grant that you get from the government will be 2,500, and it will also cover the employer's national insurance contribution.
Okay.
And it will also cover up to 3% of pension contribution.
Okay. So it really is generous in that respect. Okay. Now another big question a lot of people are asking me, but in various forms, but it's all sort of comes under the same subject. Particularly when we've got a lot of small business owners watching today. Maybe they're the only employee, or perhaps they've only got 3 or 4 employees. I guess you can sense what's coming. It's what exactly can you and can't you do when you're on furlough?
Yeah.
It's a very subjective question, but if you can give us some guidelines.
It does depend on what your position is to an extent. So if you are an employee, just your run-of-the-mill, bog standard employee, you're not a director, you're not a member of a law firm or an LLP or whatever, you're not a salaried partner of a law firm, you're just an employee, then you cannot do anything while you're on furlough. You should not be working for your employer. In fact, you should ask for your systems to be disabled, so then you are at far less risk of a data breach or accidentally breaching those regulations in any way. You can undertake training if your employer asks you to, and if your employer asks you to do training, then your employer should ensure that your 80% is at least national minimum wage, or they top it up to that. But otherwise, employers should not be doing work, and it's incorrect for anybody to be looking a way around that. If you are a director of your own company, and that is a question that I have been asked a lot, so I myself am a small limited company. I am the only employee of my limited company. If I wanted to furlough myself, then yes, I can do that, and I can claim the 80% up to 2,500. What has caused lots of consternation is that that 80% is based upon what you pay yourself through PAYE. So some people had been paying themselves around £12,000 a year in PAYE and then topping up in dividends. The 80% does not include your dividend top up. It is only your PAYE. So for some people, that's not going to be a particularly great deal of money. You can, of course, continue to top that up with money from your business if you wanted to. So you could pay yourself a higher salary and just claim back the 80%. But what you must be really cautious of doing is that you also should not be undertaking work. You should not be generating services or looking to create revenue for your business whilst you are furloughed. All you can do is an act of parliament. There was lots of talk earlier on about how can we get around this? Well, if I'm, part of my director duties is to generate sales and the success of my business, but the guidance has been much clearer now and says that all you may do if you're a director that furloughs yourself is an act of parliament, and that means a tax return. You might be able to put the claim through for your other employees. You could maybe issue P11Ds or P60s, but otherwise very little, and so you must be really careful about doing that. And HMRC will look into these claims. They will be perhaps not, going to spend a great deal of time looking at the smaller businesses, but there's a risk. So I'd be very careful about suggesting to anybody that they push vote on that one.
Yeah. So I've got an email here, for example, that maybe based on before the amendment came through, and it says they read recently that a owner, director of a small business can continue to work in an organisational role. So that's no longer the case, and they can't work in an organisational role. They can only do things that are a legal requirement. Is that correct? Yeah,
the guidance has said that you should only be undertaking things that are an act of parliament, and that's being defined quite narrowly. So
you couldn't do your accounts or anything, or raise invoices or anything like that?
Absolutely not, no. Right,
okay, so that's clarified. Yeah, coming back to the point you made about the directors who are paid themselves by dividends. I mean, we've had a lot of, that's probably the one question that, certainly in the Chamber of Commerce, that we've received more than anything from anyone about this business about dividends. And at the moment, as you say, it's only based purely on what you've been paying as a salary. I mean, some people I know don't even pay themselves any salary; they just literally pay themselves a dividend, so they really have lost out in effect. So they won't be able to claim anything. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Right, okay, good. And then in various sort of guises, the two other points which have come up are sick pay and holiday. I know they're not the same thing, but maybe you'd like to address those two. How do we deal with sick pay during furlough, and how do we deal with holiday? I mean, obviously some people actually happen to be on sick pay already when the furlough started. Some people might, fall sick during furlough, and then so let's deal with the sick pay first, and then perhaps come on to the annual leave after.
So we were talking about sick pay just earlier on today. So there has been some anomaly in the difference between the guidance which HMRC have issued and the directions. So the directions is actually the legal wording that sits behind the guidance. Now the direction says that you must complete your first period of SSP before moving to furlough. So my example that I'd like to give, Colin, is if you, for example, became unwell this week, Tuesday, and you got a sick note from your doctor that said that you were unwell for 2 weeks, but next Monday your employer says to you, I want to place you on furlough from today, actually you must complete your 2-week sickness before you can move to furlough, and then you can be furloughed. That's fine. However, the guidance notes says that you could agree with your employer that you just be furloughed from next Monday and you stop being on statutory sick pay. So that's a point where the guidance and the directions are different. Now, I would advise that you follow the directions, because the directions are the legal wording that sits behind that guidance, which means that if an employee is currently off sick, at the point that they start furlough, or at the point that you want them to start furlough, they should finish their sick note before they move to furlough. Does that make sense?
Yes, I think so. Yeah. If it doesn't, then I'm sure someone else will send in another question. I was like, just to remind the viewers, if you do have any questions, or if there's anything Lyndsay's telling you this morning which you would like clarification on, then do hit the Q&A button and give us a quick question, and we'll, if time permits, get back to those questions. So what about the annual leave? I mean, presumably if someone's on furlough, they're not going to go and want to book annual leave because they're not really doing anything anyway. But what about those who've already got annual leave booked? I mean, say someone, for example, might have a week off booked in May, and they're thinking, well, why waste my annual leave in May when I'm not going to be working anyway, and I can't go anyway? Can they cancel their annual leave? Is there a legal requirement that they can or they can't cancel their annual leave? What's the situation there?
So the employee has no right to cancel their annual leave, and this is the same as like normal employment legislation. So if you book your annual leave, then you're bound to take that annual leave, although your employer can ask you / tell you to cancel it. So if your employee has booked annual leave and you are happy for them to continue to take that annual leave, and there's no sort of issue with that, then they can take the annual leave whilst they're furloughed, but the employer must top up their salary to the 100% that their normal salary would be. There is still some debate about whether an employer can insist that somebody takes their holiday. So obviously people will have 5.6 weeks minimum holiday to take in the next 12 months. And some employers want their employees to take that holiday during this period of furlough. We think that probably you can definitely pay them that, but whether the employee will be happy to agree to being on holiday is another matter. You probably can force them to go on holiday, but I'd be mindful that the employee's probably not going to be over the moon about that. This isn't exactly a holiday period for them. So yeah, but basically, yes, you can make people go on holiday, we believe, and you just have to top up their salaries to 100% if they are on holiday during a period of furlough.
Yeah, because presumably from an employer's point of view, bearing in mind that they may be in a business where they think at some stage we're going to come out of this crisis and they're going to be very busy. Obviously, they would like their staff to use up their annual leave as much as possible. So yeah, that would also depend on the type of company and the type of business, I guess. Okay.
Point, sorry to continue on from that, Colin, is that after this is over, hopefully one day soon, they have changed legislation that annual leave can be carried over for the next 2 years as well. So if employees do come out of this, say we finish this in June, and an employee has 20 days annual leave still to take for the remainder of this holiday year, that can be carried over into next year with the employer's agreement, and also into the year after as well, because previously there was legislation that said an employee must take a minimum of 28 or 5.6 weeks annual leave every year, and that was a legal minimum. But now they've said that actually that they're going to waive that, and for the next 2 years that leave can be carried over, so that an employee might not take 5.6 weeks in any particular 12-month period. Oh,
that's interesting. So does that mean that prior to the coronavirus, it would have been illegal for an employer to allow an employee to carry over their annual leave then?
Yeah, so if you have an employee who's got a contract that says that they're on the statutory minimum annual leave, then they shouldn't be carrying over annual leave from 1 year to the next. That's a breach of the working time regulations that says an employee must have 5.6 weeks every year, and if your employee had an accident at work and was found to not be taking their required rest and recuperation period as set out in legislation, you could be in trouble for that. So yeah, carry over annual leave if they're only on the minimum.
Right. And just to clarify, during the current legislation where you can carry it over, it still has to be with the employer's permission.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So am I correct in saying that the minimum furlough period is 3 weeks?
Yes, that's correct. So it must be for a minimum of 3 weeks, and then you can break the period of furlough. So perhaps I was talking to an employer, they weren't sure how, they wanted to furlough their payroll person, but then they didn't know who was going to do payroll. So I said, well, you could furlough for 3 weeks and then make sure that 3 weeks ends just before the payroll period. She comes back into work for 2 or 3 days, runs the payroll, and then can go back onto furlough for another 3 weeks after that, that intermediate
yeah. Okay, but you can't sort of have one person on 1 week and another person on 2 weeks. You can't say, okay, I'll put Johnny on 1 week pay and then I'll put Susie on for 2 weeks. It has to be one particular person has to be on for a minimum of 3 weeks. Yeah. Yeah,
but you can alternate them. So you could say Johnny goes for 3 weeks, then he's back to work for 3 weeks, and Susie goes for the next 3 weeks. So
right. Yeah. Okay.
And then you can put Johnny back on. So you can take people on and off, but they must always have a minimum of 3 weeks.
Right. Okay. We talked about sick pay. We talked about annual leave. A couple of other ones which come up are maternity and indeed paternity leave, and also someone who happened to be working their notice. So maybe if we deal with paternity and maternity leave first.
Okay, so you can furlough somebody whilst they're on maternity leave or paternity leave, and they should continue to receive just statutory maternity pay or the statutory paternity pay. So really, you probably wouldn't bother furloughing them because they're not at work and they're not going to be working, and they're just to receive their statutory pay. The only time that you might want to furlough them is if you were paying an enhanced contractual payment over and above the statutory, and then you can furlough them and you can claim back 80% of the enhanced payment. So some employers might pay their employee 100% maternity pay, perhaps for 6 months if they were massively generous, and they can furlough with that employee and claim the 80% grant back on the enhanced pay.
Right, okay. And if someone happens to be working their notice, does that make any difference?
No, so that's a question I've been asked twice, particularly around if you have made somebody redundant and they're working their notice in a redundancy period, although it's notice whatever, redundancy period or not, then yes, you can still claim the 80% back whilst the employee is on their notice period.
Right, okay. I've got a question here. What about if an employee is shielding or similar, I guess, if an employee is self-isolating on medical advice? What's the situation there? If they haven't been furloughed or if they have or whatever?
Yeah, so there was lots of discussion about that at the outset. The guidance specifically says that if an employee is shielding or that somebody who lives with them is required to self-isolate because they live with someone who has been advised to shield, then they are entitled to be furloughed if the employer agrees it. And I mean, that's the point, that nobody has, despite what Martin Lewis says, nobody's got the right to say my employer must furlough me. It's always up to the employer to agree. If an employer, for whatever reason, I don't know why they wouldn't, but you never know, says, no, I don't want to furlough this person, then somebody who is shielding is now entitled to statutory sick pay for the period that they're shielding for. But I'd put them on furlough, why wouldn't you?
Right, okay. And what about the end of furlough? So when you put someone on furlough, do you have to tell them how long you put them on furlough for?
You don't have to specify the end date. You can say that it's open. You can say you must say it's for a minimum of 3 weeks.
Yeah,
And then in general, I've sort of been saying that this will be ongoing and we'll keep you updated.
Right, okay. So so say, for example, I put someone on furlough and I'm thinking, come the, well, let's say come the end of May, I decide, okay, I want you back at work. Do I have to give them a certain period of notice that their furlough's ended, or I just tell them, okay, your furlough
I don't
ends?
think, as far as my reading of it, unless I've missed it, there's nothing to say a specific period that you have to, a specific notice period. And in fact, the employee should be ready for work at any time. They're not on holiday because you're not putting them on holiday. They should be sat there waiting to rush back to work at any moment. But I mean, I think you need to think about employment engagement and things as well as just by the letter of the law. So if you can give people a bit of notice when they're expected to start working again, then that would be
okay.
And also the guidance doesn't specifically say that you need to give written notification of when they will start again, but I would, because I think that will make things tidier and help keep your records correct. And also, while I think of it, sorry, a massive geek, but you know, we talked about that you must give written notification that the employee, or written agreement that the employee has agreed. HMRC have said you must keep that for 5 years.
Right.
So that's important, because you might be audited 5 years down the line when this is long forgotten, and if you haven't kept your letters, you could be in trouble and you have to repay whatever monies you've claimed.
Okay. Are there any sort of standard forms or letters that you can download from the internet, just the standard wording you'd need to put on a furlough letter? Or?
So ACAS have got a standard letter that they've developed, so that's a free template. I haven't looked at it, so I can't say how good or bad I think it is. I have seen some that, for me, I would want it to very specifically say, I agree that I shall not work for the period of furlough, because that has been specifically asked for in the legislation. And some of the templates I've seen haven't been quite as clear as that. They've just said, I agree to be on furlough, but not necessarily clarifying that that means that they agree to not work.
Right, okay. I'm just going to have a quick look to see what questions have come in also from whilst we've been talking. Some more have come in.
I can see a few picking up there, but I don't want to look at them because then I'll be
Okay, don't worry. You sit back and relax and just concentrate on answering the questions. Can a director, I'm just reading this literally straight off the screen. Can a director process an insurance claim with regards to loss of income due to closure while on furlough? So I guess this is, so a director who's got an insurance policy if they had to close their business due to furlough, can they still make a claim on their insurance for loss of income?
I mean, I don't know. Is that an act of Parliament? Possibly. I honestly don't know the answer to that. I think I probably would say yes, I'd still make that application. You're not generating services or revenue for your business. I think that would probably be okay, but I'm not going to prison for advising on that one.
No.
So.
Okay. So let's have a look at what else we've got. As I say, some of them may cover ones already answered. This is quite a specific one. I'm not. I won't bother reading out the names because I didn't actually check at the beginning whether people wanted their names read out. My omission there. So this one, we have 4 members of staff who started working for us on the 1st of March. However, the RTI submission, including their starter forms, wasn't submitted to the payroll bureau until 24th of March. Am I correct thinking these staff cannot be furloughed? First thing, actually, Lyndsay, could you just clarify for those who don't know, what does RTI stand for?
Oh God,
you know,
real-time information. Real-time information, I think it stands for. It's a payroll issue, and I'm not a big payroll person because it's too complicated and involves maths, which is not my forte. So the guidance said that employees had to be on real-time information, so a PAYE submission to HMRC by the 19th of March. Interestingly, on the calculator, it says the 16th of March, another example of where HMRC are getting in a bit of a muddle, but it's the 19th of March. So although those employees did start on the 1st of March, because they were not on the real-time information, the PAYE, by the 19th of March, which was the deadline, unfortunately, they will not be eligible. Or the employer is not eligible to claim that furlough grant. For that employer, I would advise that perhaps they speak to the employee about agreeing a layoff clause, where the employee perhaps takes a period of unpaid leave but continues to be employed rather than being made redundant immediately, if the employer can't continue to pay them through this period.
This one is referring to CJRS, which I believe is Coronavirus Job Retention Scheme. In actual fact, let's start off. Perhaps you could tell us what the Coronavirus Job Retention Scheme is.
That's furlough, so it's just the posh.
I see. Right. Okay. Sorry. That's good to know. So I thought it was something different.
Because it's called the Job Retention Scheme. So originally, when the guidance came out, it was all around this is to stop people making everybody redundant and keep them employed. But actually, the scheme has evolved massively. So now covers people who are never going to be at risk of being made redundant, such as employees perhaps who are shielding or employees who are on maternity, etc. And now they're being encompassed into the scheme as well. So now it no longer is just about job retention, but it was originally.
Right, okay. So this question may be something we've already covered. It says, I read that there is a mechanism for a director to claim in the capacity of an employee, which is obviously, yes, true. There is a condition that all earnings, all or part, are derived from PAY as opposed to dividends. Yes, we've already covered that, haven't we? Yeah. It may not be clear at this time, but how will this work in practice? I.e., director could still be taking a monthly salary from the company's remaining cash balance, but the company's business has dried up. So presumably that would depend on whether they're already on PAYE, would it? As we've already
so
said.
I think for that question, the person can continue to take salary from the business until such time as the business runs out of money. But they shouldn't be taking dividends, is my understanding. But that's a quite technical accountancy question, I think, about how you manage your business.
Exactly,
as far as furlough is concerned, yes, you can furlough yourself if you're a director of a business, but it's 80% on the PAYE, not on the dividends.
Next one's about annual leave, which, have we said, it can only be carried over with the employer's permission. So we've covered that one, I'm not sure we covered this one specifically. Can you make an employee redundant when they are furloughed, or do you have to bring them back before you make them redundant?
No, you can, and I'm actually doing that for 2 employers at the moment. So what we have done so there's one that I was doing just yesterday. So we spoke to her, told her that the business is winding up actually, which isn't to do with coronavirus, but it could have been. So they are closing the business. They're not entirely sure when that will happen, sometime in the summer probably. So we've begun consultation. We've placed her on furlough because she's not working anywhere at the moment. There's no business going on. During the furlough period, the guidance that the direction that I've had from other more learned people than myself is that you can continue to consult, and that wouldn't be in breach of the employee not doing any work. So consultation with the employee on a redundancy process, you can still do that while they're furloughed. So we're going to hold 3 meetings with her to talk about the proposed redundancy, and then at the end of those 3 meetings, it's likely that her role will be confirmed as redundant, and she will move into a 12-week notice period. During her notice period, that notice period for her runs out on the 20th of July, because we've already gone through the consultation period and she's on 12 weeks notice. So during that 12 weeks notice period, up till the end of June, she will be on furlough. So the government will be picking up 80% of her redundancy notice pay. And then after that point, she will either return to work for the end of her notice, or the employer can choose to pay her in lieu of notice up to the end of the notice period.
Right. Okay. What about just someone that's come to me? What about somebody who's got two jobs, 2 different employers? Presumably, one employer might have put them on furlough, but they could still be doing the other job. There's no rules about that. There's no restrictions on that, is there?
There was lots of talk about that to start with, particularly, so if somebody's got 2 jobs, that's fine. They might work as a dinner lady during, although dinner lady is slightly different because they're a public sector employee. So they might have a job in the morning with Tesco's, and they can continue to do that job even if they've been furloughed in the afternoon by another employer. There was also lots of talk about, well, if I'm furloughed from my employer, so ABC Construction has placed me on furlough, and I'm sat at home with my husband and my kids, and they're driving me mad. I want to go and work at Tesco's and help out. Can I do that? Now, there was lots of talk about whether that was allowed or not. Lots on LinkedIn, it's immoral, etc., etc. Anyway, basically, yes, you can do that. You can go and take a job elsewhere if you want to, as long as your contract of employment with your original employer doesn't stop you from doing so. And lots of contracts would say that you might need your employer's permission to do that. And it's up to the employer to decide that.
Right. So in effect, someone could be on furlough, getting 80%, and then going out and work full time somewhere else and receiving a full wage for that as well.
And they can volunteer elsewhere as well. That's allowed in the guidelines. One question I was asked yesterday was, well, what if my wife can volunteer for the company? And she worked for my company as a volunteer, so that I can furlough all the staff, but my wife can still go in and do some of the work that needs to be done. And that's not allowed. So to be a volunteer, you mustn't be generating, it must be for a charity, or you can volunteer. You can do unpaid work if you're a student or an intern or as part of a training course, but you can't just be a volunteer and unpaid in a normal doing a normal role. And that's just standard UK employment legislation. It's actually under the Slavery Act, not to do with coronavirus.
Right. Okay. I apologise to the viewers if I'm not asking these in an exit order. I'm trying to sort of keep a sense of order to our minds rather than going off in all different directions. But someone else has asked me about the 20%. If you're furloughed, but an employer's topping up to 20%, the rules still apply. You still can't work at all, even though you're getting the 20% from your employer.
No, you absolutely cannot work. And you have written confirmation from the employee, written agreement from the employee that they will not work. And in fact, I would be even saying that, you should be sending emails to managers to tell managers they should not be asking people to work. And if they do, that's a disciplinary issue. I mean, the issue is that if you are found to be abusing the scheme, HMRC are going to be all over this. I mean, it's costing so much money. If people are found to be abusing the scheme, they will not be allowed to claim for furlough going forward, and they will be asked to pay back whatever they have already paid. It could be financially catastrophic because you've asked Jill to check the emails. Don't do it, would be my advice. Okay. So if an employer is abusing the scheme somehow, then they could potentially be asked to pay it back as well by HMRC. Not just an employer was abusing it, but also if an employee was abusing it as well. No, the employer would be liable because this grant is being paid to the employer. This is not to do with the employee. The employee is receiving this. It's not like job seekers allowance or anything. It's not a benefit that is going to the employee. This grant is going to the employer. So the employer is responsible. And that actually is one of the points about if you have people employed on a visa. So there was a question earlier on about not from you, but when the scheme first came out, if you have employees who are employed on a visa and their visa says they have no access to public funds, so for example, if they were to not have a job, they couldn't go and claim job seekers allowance, for example, are they eligible to be on the scheme? And yes, HMRC have clarified that they are eligible because this grant is paid to employers, it is not paid to employees.
Yeah, so the status of the employer is irrelevant. It's the employer that's getting the grant.
Absolutely, yeah.
And obviously the employer is legally obliged to pass that money on to the employee.
Yeah.
Right.
And to make sure their employees are not working, because that's their responsibility.
Yeah, so that's their responsibility. Yeah, okay.
Which is why I said about disabling systems, because then you can make sure that people aren't working.
Yes, sure. Yeah. Okay. So the big one we haven't really talked about yet is actually the claiming the money back, which I believe yesterday was a significant day in terms of the system opened, in terms of people being able to, or employers being able to start applying for the money, with the obvious target that those people that are paying their employees, traditionally the 28th of the month is a traditional payday, isn't it? Which is what a week today, isn't it? So I know there was talk on the radio that the government are hoping that a lot of employers will be able to get their money into their bank accounts ready to pay their employees on the 28th of April. Do you want to elaborate on that? Just tell us a little bit more about how that's working and the actual going about claiming the money.
I don't actually run any payroll for employers, so I would not be responsible for putting that data into the system. So it's not a system that I'm particularly au fait with, but I have been listening to some people who are more learned than me on this, and Simon Chaplin, who's an accountant who was giving a webinar on it, said that in general the feedback had been accountants had been surprised and delighted that the portal is performing, and yesterday 140,000 people made claims, or 140,000 organisations made claims. Everybody expected, the cynical Brits, we thought it would crash and that nobody would be able to use it, but actually it has worked, and it's working well. So that seems to be the feedback. I can run through a couple of the bits, Colin. Would that be useful that I picked up from this webinar?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So Simon was saying that you have to do the claim within 30 minutes of starting the claim. So if you have a lot of employees, make sure that you've got all the information that you need before you start inputting that data, because if you take more than 30 minutes, it will crash, or it will time out, and you have to start again. So get all your information ready before you start. There's some really good guidance on what information that you need, but it's things like national insurance and salaries, etc. There has been some queries about how calculations are being made and whether the calculations should be done based on calendar days or working days. That is still to be clarified, so I can't offer any sort of more advice on that. You can't claim, you can only make one claim per period. So you can claim for March and April in April, but then going forward you'll claim for one period each month. So that might be something to keep in mind.
Yeah, someone's actually I've just got a question on the screen about that. So let's just pick up and clarify that point, Lyndsay. So you have to claim each month for that particular month's pay period. Is that what you're saying? So for example, if you claim now, you're only claiming for April, and then you have to claim again in May, or?
Yeah, so you can claim for April and for March and April, I understand. This is just my understanding of it, because I'm not an expert in this area, but my understanding is that you can claim for March and April in time, but you can only make one application, so you can only go on once a period, and a period is a month. So whatever you claim for now in April, for March and April, is fine, and then you can do it again in May, and then presumably you would claim for May, is my understanding.
Right. Okay. And someone's asked a question actually, which is probably will only apply if you had a good cash flow. They said, do you have to claim furlough each pay period, or could you wait and claim for 3 or 4 months? Say maybe in June, July, could you backdate your claim for April, May and June? My
understanding is you can, so I believe that you can pay employees before you claim, and that you can leave it and claim later. There was also talk with this accountant this morning that you need to perhaps have already submitted your ITI for April, so that you already need to have done your real-time information before you submit the claim. So that's something to be mindful of. I'm not sure if that's correct or not. To be honest, I don't even really know how that ITI works.
No, that's fair enough. Okay, that's fine. I like someone who admits their limitations.
Payroll is just not my thing at all. It's quite complex.
Okay, no problem.
There was also some information about under 16-year-olds can't be claimed for because they don't have a national insurance number, and you need a national insurance number to make a claim. Hopefully that will be sorted in due course, but that's something to be aware of. And the final bit that I thought was quite interesting was that on the portal, apparently right at the end it says please enter your postcode, and it looks like it's asking for your bank postcode, but it's not. It's asking for your business postcode that your bank holds. So just be aware of that, because otherwise if you put the wrong thing in, then I understand that it might take you back to the beginning or something. So I thought that was an interesting bit of trivia there that might come in handy.
Yeah, I'm sure it would. Yeah, good.
But this is sort of second-hand information that I'm passing on because I haven't used the system myself and have no intention of doing so.
Yeah, okay, brilliant, thank you. I think that's covered most of it. Just a couple of questions just to wrap up. I think that's really just clarifications. One person saying, can we just confirm, which I think we have, that the employer must legally top up the extra 20% for holiday pay if it has been previously booked. So yes, you said if someone's got holiday pay, then the employer has to pay the extra 20%.
Well, they must pay the employer's normal full-time salary. So either that, it might be more than 20% if the employee, if 80%.
Oh yes, sorry, if the employee's earning more than 2,500, okay.
You know how and I am, Colin. I'm like,
no, that's right. That's the best way. That's why you're in HR. Can staff? Well, we already talked about this. Really, can staff complete training when on furlough as not earning money for the business? And you said yes. So anyone who's watching the webinar today on furlough, that's not a problem.
So they can undertake training, but if employees are training whilst they're on furlough, you must ensure that the 80% is equivalent to at least the national minimum wage. So if you have employees who are on or near national minimum wage and you ask them to do training, you can't just pay them 80%, you will have to top up.
Okay, right. And presumably the person delivering the training, if it is a member of staff delivering the training, obviously they can't be on furlough, they'd have to be employed, right?
I think it's going to work really well for people who are asked to do sort of online training. That sort of thing. You can also, it hasn't specifically said in the guidelines, but, taking a pragmatic approach, I think you could also have a catch up with your employee. Then being on furlough doesn't mean that you just can't ever speak to them again. I think I'd treat it as if an employee is on maternity leave or on long-term sick, where it's fine to keep in contact with them and speak to them occasionally, and maybe even invite them to like evening quizzes, or maybe even a team meeting, as long as you don't go into too much detail, as a catch up, communication to the employees, and you can do that while an employee is furloughed.
Yeah, because I've got a question. I won't read the whole question out, but that was sort of along those lines, because you mentioned about closing down systems and everything. But obviously, the employer does still need to be in contact with the employee and talking to them. So there's no harm in having a weekly phone call, for example, or catch up or something like that. Okay.
And in fact, I'd encourage that to make sure that employees don't feel forgotten and unloved. So.
Yeah. Okay. I think let me just double check. I think that's all the questions. But is there anything else that we've sort of not covered that you think you'd like to add as a sort of as we wrap it up? Or?
No, I don't think so. As far as furlough is concerned, that's more or less. There's so many questions still on furlough, but in general, I think that's sort of covered off the main points. I think the only other thing that I might want to talk about, Colin, is that whilst we're all obsessed with coronavirus, there have actually been some other employment law updates that have come in April. That perhaps we might have missed. So one of those is that job contracts, employment contracts have changed. So from 6th of April, employees and workers, so that means people on 0 hours or casual workers, or even contractors, have the right to a written statement of particulars from day one. It used to be you had 8 weeks to give that information to employees after they'd started, but now they must have it on or before they start work, and that has been a change in UK legislation. Contracts themselves have changed in that you now need to ensure that the contract refers to the employee's expected working pattern. It refers to any other benefits that they're entitled to, for example, maternity leave, or any other benefits that might be payable by the employer. That should be included in the contract of employment, the terms and conditions, and it should also refer to what training the employee might be allowed or might be required to do. So if you are using a contract of employment template that you have borrowed previously from another employer, which I know lots of small businesses do, that I've seen contracts where people have forgotten to change the headings at the bottom or something, and it's referring back to a business that is not the business that we're talking about. you need to make sure that they're up to date, because those changes have come into effect as of April. There's also been a new piece of legislation called Jack's Law that has come into legislation in April, and that's around parental bereavement leave, which is a really sad piece of legislation. But basically, if an employee has a child that dies, previously they weren't entitled under legislation to any time off, so they might have gone off on sick, but there was no entitlement to any other period of leave, and this piece of legislation means that employees are entitled to 2 weeks paid leave at a statutory rate if they unfortunately have a child who passes away.
Right, okay, good. So yeah, basically what you're saying is, despite coronavirus, the world's still going on, the laws are still changing, and people need to keep up to date with HR. Right.
I think that actually after this, so at the moment, I work as a member at Employment Tribunal as well, and Employment Tribunals are on stand at a halt at the moment, but they're looking to start these up again using web-based technology as soon as possible. And I do think that actually, as a result of the coronavirus furlough scheme, we will have quite a few claims come through, because the rules have been interpreted very quickly, and I think that there's going to be lots of new cases coming through in the next sort of 12 months or so.
Okay. My final question, which I didn't tell you I was going to ask you, but I'll ask you anyway. What do you think positive has come out of this in terms of HR? What is there any positive things that you think will evolve as a result of the coronavirus scheme and all these things?
Yeah, I think a willingness on behalf of employers to allow people to work from home and to be more flexible. I hope that will come from it. I mean, I've always worked from home, so to be honest, this really it doesn't feel very different for me, other than that I never knew about furlough because it never existed before this, and I'm even more busy than usual. But yeah, I'm hoping that employers will be more open to applications from employees to work from home, or perhaps work different working patterns. And you know, I wonder about government social policy in terms of that this has been a very socialist model in this massive funding of employees, but who knows?
Yeah, okay, good. Right, so I think that's, as I say, we've covered all the questions, and hopefully we've given people a lot of useful information. Just to clarify also, Lyndsay, as I say, runs a HR consultancy, so I'm just going to share with you now Lyndsay's email address. So if you've got any questions which you'd like to send to Lyndsay offline, or if you think of something after the webinar, then feel free to contact Lyndsay. I'm sure she'll be happy to answer any quick questions you've got, or maybe potentially you might like to become a client of Lyndsay's, and if you've got a number of employees and you think it would be useful to have someone like Lyndsay in your team. So that's Lyndsay's contact details.
I will just say on that, Colin, sorry to interrupt you again, that I'm happy to answer, because I know sometimes people don't like to ring because they think that I'm going to start charging the minute I pick up the phone. And if you have a query on coronavirus or anything else, then, you know, just call for a fee-free chat. If you need ongoing advice and lots of letters and lots of support, then of course I will have to charge. But if you have a quick question about this or any other issue, I'm a massive HR geek, so you're doing me a favour. Just call them and ask, and I'm happy to help if I can.
Great. Okay. Well, thanks very much, Lyndsay. I really appreciated your time today, and maybe we'll speak to you again, depending on how long this scheme goes on for. There might be more questions or anything, but wish you all the best of luck, and thanks you very much for your time today. Just before we finish, I'd just like to tell our viewers about the next one coming up, which is on Friday morning. The plan is to make these twice a week, Tuesday and Fridays, depending on how long things go on for and how many potential presenters we've got. Next Friday's presenter, that's this Friday coming at 9:30, someone I'm very familiar with, myself, Colin Barber. I'm going to be presenting a webinar on Friday, talking about, well, the title of the webinar is actually Choose Your Attitude. And it's about how we approach not just the coronavirus, but how we approach challenging times in our life. So we've got lots of changes going on in our lives at the moment, which we can't influence, which have just come out of the blue, totally unexpected, totally unprepared for in many respects, and certainly something which we've had no previous experience in dealing with. But the one thing which we do always have control over, and which will never ever change, in any adversity we come to, we always have a choice of how we approach adversity. So in other words, choose your attitude. So on Friday morning, I'm going to be giving you some tips and advice on how you can choose your attitude to make sure that you're actually approaching this situation in a positive and meaningful way. And sort of picking up on the question which I asked Lyndsay right at the end there, so that we can actually look back and think, okay, there were some positives which came out of the coronavirus, and we've adapted, and as a result of them, and in many ways we can look back and hopefully think, well, there were some benefits of it, even though obviously there were a lot of downsides. So I'd say Friday morning, 9:30, if you could register in the same way that you did before. And we will be issuing a recording of this webinar, so I know there's quite a lot to take in from the webinar. So if you want to recap on some of the points, or indeed you might have some colleagues or other employees in your organisation who think would like to see the webinar, then probably within the next day, it will be in the next day or two, we'll be releasing the webinar onto YouTube, and where you'll be able to see it and, as I say, share it with your colleagues. So all that remains really is to thank you very much for listening, and thank you, Lyndsay, for all your input. And we look forward to seeing you again on Friday. Thank you.